topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, it's been over 6 decades, right? And the mystery still continues as to who was responsible for killing John F. Kennedy. And, as many people out there are opinions, but clearly the majority of America believes that this is a conspiracy that yet has been resolved. And one of the greatest mysteries is why the man accused of assassinating President John F. Kennedy was himself gunned down. Think about that, right? Well, Robert Tanenbaum, who is an attorney, in fact, in 1976 was appointed deputy chief counsel in charge of the congressional investigation into the assassination of President Kennedy. He is the author of the book, That Day in Dallas, Lee Harvey Oswald Did Not Kill JFK. He's an author of 33 books, 29 novels, 4 nonfiction books, one of the most successful prosecuting attorneys, having never lost a felony trial and convicting hundreds of violent criminals. He was a special prosecution consultant on the Hillside Strangler case in Los Angeles and defended Amy Grossberg in her sensationalized baby death case. He was the assistant district attorney in New York County in the office of legendary district attorney Frank Hogan, where he ran the Homicide Bureau. Robert Tanenbaum joins us now. Robert, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, this has been one of those questions that has haunted the American people for 6 decades as to who shot JFK. And in your book, That Day in Dallas, you say there's no question about it. It wasn't Lee Harvey Oswald.
That's right. The evidence in the case is overwhelming. As a matter of fact, the way I got involved in this whole thing was in October of 1976. And Richard A. Sprague, who was Mr. Pennsylvania as far as lawyers were concerned, he was a chief assistant DA in Philadelphia. And he became in the middle of October 1976. He was appointed chief counsel of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, that was looking into the assassinations of President Kennedy and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And he called me up. I didn't know who he was. I was, as you mentioned, I was running the Homicide Bureau, and I was trying murder case after, I was prosecuting murder case after murder case. It turned out that the only person who ever tried more, no one ever tried more in New York than I, but Richard Sprague tried more than I. I mean, that's the kind of a guy he was. He was a tremendous integrity person and a brilliant, wonderful individual. So he called me up in the middle of October of 1976 and asked me if I wanted to be part of this investigation, that he wanted me to work with him on the assassination of President Kennedy. And it was a subcommittee. So we met, we chatted, and I believed in him that he was a truth seeker. And indeed, I was right. And we stayed together for many, many years. We had a 46-year friendship as a result of meeting through this case. And what happened was, when we went to Washington, as you know, a select committee has a life of 2 years. That is to say, it gets funded. All the standing committees get funded every couple of years. They don't go through a process. But a select committee has a 2-year life. So this select committee was starting in 77 in January, and it would have expired, or did expire, in 78, December 31. Now, a lot of things happened during this period of time, because ultimately Sprague and I obtained a commitment from the members of the committee that they would not interfere with the investigation. They wouldn't politicize this thing. If they did, we would leave, because it's their committee. It was a congressional committee. It wasn't a Tanenbaum committee or a Sprague committee. And they agreed they would not fool around with this. And we said we have no brief in this case. That is to say, we're not coming down here to say Oswald did it or Oswald didn't do it. We don't know. And
exactly.
whatever the evidence would be, we're going to tell the American public if that's what you want.
Robert, I want to make sure our audience understands the kind of attorney that you and Sprague represent, which is the majority of attorneys. You didn't come in with a fixed agenda. You didn't come in, off the heels of, the Warren Commission or what anybody else said. You just said, look, we're attorneys. We follow the evidence, and we follow the evidence to its truthful conclusion. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly right to say, and that's what we started out doing. And as a matter of fact, what happened was, what the evidence in this case is so overwhelming that when I spoke to Lou Stokes every day, and he was the chairman of our committee, Lou Stokes, he was a member of the House for represented Cleveland, Ohio, and as a matter of fact, he took a special seat because his brother, Carl Stokes, was the first black mayor of Cleveland. They wanted to have a federal seat so that they can get the money and do good things with it. Infrastructure, schools, education, all these kinds of things that, people want when they go to Washington. Whether they do it when they get there is a whole other story. Right. Anyway, our story is that first week we were in Washington, I got a call from Richard Schweiker. He's a Republican member of the so-called Church Committee, which was investigating the assassinations of the executive intelligence agencies, and they wanted to know the effect on the executive intelligence agencies and who may have committed the murders that were involved with President Kennedy and ultimately with Martin Luther King. So the bottom line here was that Schweiker told me he wanted to send in Schweiker, again, a conservative Republican. He wasn't out for any kind of a self-aggrandizement. He wasn't looking for any meetings with the press, etc. And as a matter of fact, he was very subdued because he said, I want you to take my notes. The evidence is in there from what we found. We know that you're not bound by it by any stretch of the imagination. And I said, thank you, that's correct. And I said, what else can I do for you? He said, I want you to know two things, both of which I know your background. You were head of the criminal courts in the Homicide Bureau in the New York County DA's office. And when you were head of the criminal courts, you had 250 new cases every day because we arraigned 7 days a week at night as well as during the day. So there were 150 new cases during the day and 100 at night. And he said, I need someone who can evaluate caseload, who can evaluate evidence. You're the person for me. So that was what the whole thing with Sprague was. And so anyway, Schweiker gives me his notes, and he said, what I have to tell you is that the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, totally obstructed this investigation from inception. They lied.
He told you that up front.
Up front, right the first week when I was in Washington, when he asked me to come to his office, when it all happened in his office. Yeah. And he said they totally obstructed this investigation. They lied. They made things up. And it's all there in my notes. But what really rankles me, and I must say it's gut-wrenching for me to tell you, as someone who spent 10 years in the DA's office in Manhattan doing what you were doing, we know about all the cases that you prosecuted. They were all cases, jury cases to verdict, by the way. Not you put a juror in the box and someone then pleads guilty. Oh, I have it. I just had a jury trial. Yeah, no, that's a dream. But anyway, what I'm saying is that he then said to me, what is gut-wrenching for me to tell you is from the evidence as we found it, the CIA was involved and participated in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Well, I must tell you, he was right. I was shocked. And when he told me that, I felt that there were like 10 gallons of ice water poured on my head.
Yeah, because you're kind of going into this with a neutral mindset, saying, okay, let me find the evidence. And so the guy who brings you in says, well, let me tell you up front, all my research. I mean, at this point, we're 14, almost 15 years since the assassination, right?
Yeah, exactly. This was 77.
Yeah.
76, I was appointed in October.
Right.
And then in 77, it was the first week I was in Washington on this case, along with Sprague. And that's when Senator Richard Schweiker called me to tell me what his findings were, because he was head of the subcommittee, the senatorial subcommittee on the assassination that occurred in the executive intelligence agencies, how they responded to it. That was what his mission was. So he investigated the Kennedy assassination, and these were the things he told me the very first week we were in Washington.
Wow. So what other things did he reveal to you, Robert, besides that the CIA was involved in the assassination of JFK? Did he refute the sole gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald?
Oh, that is probably the evidence that was offered by the select committee was so embarrassing. And he said that to me during the course of the conversation. He said, "You're not going to believe what people did who were on these committees. They definitely, in his opinion, the government contrived knowingly. This was not some naive situation." He claimed from the evidence, all of which was in his notes, that the government knowingly contrived a predetermined conclusion through the pretense of an investigation. It was a pretense probe, if you will. And both the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee on Assassinations, according to his opinion, were disregarded all the convincing and testimony of evidence that and trustworthy evidence that was there and is still there as far as he was concerned. You'll be very surprised how it's so accessible. I said, why? Why has nobody else come up with this?
Exactly. That would be my
question. I'm going to tell you why, and you're going to hear this from other people. I'm sure Lou Stokes, who was chairman of the committee, will tell you and verify this. People were afraid of a retaliation from the CIA if they investigated this case properly. I said, that is something that I find absolutely also incredible. Moreover, what was incredible was the committee decided, after they came down with the single bullet theory, with neutron activation analysis, the alleged science in this case, they claimed, and the alleged science, metallurgical PhDs rather, metallurgical PhDs, when they heard about this neutron activation analysis, which was the principal testing component for comparative bullet lead analysis. What does all that mean? It means that they claimed, these so-called experts from neutron activation analysis, they claimed that a fragment can match a fragment and a fragment could match a bullet. Why is this important in the case? Because in the justification for what they decided, the CIA decided to go through it, was that neutron activation analysis, NAA, was science. And if anybody doesn't believe the science of NAA, and this is what they said, this is not something to be made up. That then you believe in the world is flat.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, same argument they told us about COVID, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no question. And so what happened was, no one bothered from the government at that time to speak to metallurgical PhDs who, once they found out about what was being alleged from NAA, they came in and they said NAA is invalid. And here are the reasons why. You can't get involved in this development of these issues as it relates to, for example, a pistol. We know from every pistol that's made there's an infirmity. And so now a bullet spins through it, you have the loops and the whorls, and you can show that they came from the same gun. That's not what this is. That's not what neutron activation analysis is. That is, since, and the importance in the case, in the lie, which the evidence tells us, was that the NAA issue left two pieces of missiles in the case, two pieces of ballistics. Why? They claim that there were two major fragments in the limo that matched each other and that they came from one bullet. Then they said Governor Connolly had some fragments removed from his wrist, right? Because Connolly, as you know, was struck, as they found out, they made up that in the wound in JFK's throat, the magic bullet came out.
Right.
struck finally in the back and the shoulder, fractured his axial nerve in his right wrist and severed the tendon in his thumb and between his right thumb and his right index finger. Now, this bullet, talking about absurdity, was that we know from what happened at Dealey Plaza, the government's position was, and has never changed for 62 years, is that there were 3 shots from the rear of JFK. One hit him in the head, and one hit him in the right in the body, 5-6 inches below the neckline.
Right.
So if the opening were in the throat, it was below the neckline on the shoulder blade area of his back, and it was a downward track.
Exactly.
The question arose. I wanted to know if that's the case. We know that from autopsy, and all this evidence is in the book.
Right.
It's all in the book. So what happened was they said, yes, there was a downward track, but you know what happened here? It actually went up 11 degrees and came out JFK's throat, and that's the bullet of the one bullet theory. Now,
you mean in all your court cases and dealing with any kind of bullet trajectory, you've never seen a bullet, alter its flight?
Well, author its trail. It altered its trail, right?
Right.
So we want to talk about the absurdities of this case. By the way, the House Select Committee decided that once they were getting questioned about what they were finding, they then sealed for 50 years the evidence in this case, which was totally improper to do in my judgment. There was no evidence here that we found to this date that dealt with national security. And I said to the government people, if there is any interference here or disclosures we don't want to make about national security, we'll go to court. We'll have an in-camera, a private meeting with the judge on the record and ask the judge to make a finding. I know from my experience, when I looked at all these documents, there's nothing there involving any embarrassment or unnecessary disclosures of national security or anything else. So they totally ignored this. But here's the other aspect of the case, which I think is important, and that is when the shots were fired at Dealey Plaza, and again, Sprague and I did nothing different than we did with investigating every murder case we had responsibility for, and for that matter, every other case as well. And that is, there were 5 shots fired at Dealey Plaza. And the significance of it was the witnesses were very important. Why do I say that? Because most witnesses feel if they can't make an identification of a shooter in a shooting murder, for example, or any kind of case like that, where they think they could identify the shooter at a lineup, they don't think they made any contribution. But that's not the case, because here we go. At Dealey Plaza, the witnesses told us that there were, basically from all the documents and everything else we looked at, that there were 2 flurries of shots. The first flurry hit Kennedy and Connolly in the back, and Kennedy, according to the government, was hit in the head. Those were that turned out because of the science in the case. Keep in mind, from when I was investigating this case, I had what I call immutable evidence, scientific, visual, audio, and acoustics that were laid out more scientifically than others who at the time were doing this. Right. So when I say that the witnesses said there were 2 or 3 shots in the first flurry, there were 3 shots. We know that. And they said it happened very quickly. Well, we know what happened in 2.6 seconds. And then they said, by the way, all the shooting at Dealey Plaza took 8.3 seconds. 2.6, they said it happened quickly. Then the witnesses said there was a pause. The pause was 4.8 seconds. They didn't know these numbers.
Right.
And then this is what happened. And I urge everybody to take a good look at this. See for yourself what I'm about to tell you. The 4th shot was a boom blast that people on the bridge watching the motorcade, the limo come down Elm going westerly. And that was Holland and his other group of 5 that were with him and so on. They immediately turned to their left to look at the area of the stockade fence. Matter of fact, when you look at Zapruder filming, he looks over there in that area, and there were people on the grass in front of that area who went down on the grass, some who protect their children because they thought they were in the line of fire.
Right.
So now at frame 313, what I call that Zapruder of frame 313, we see, and again, this is all in the book, that day in Dallas. It's in the book because it represents what we see, a major flare, and that's the shot that blows Kennedy's head out. So he's murdered completely. He's murdered at frame 313. I even have frame 312 in there, so you see the difference right away. Bango. It's 18.3 frames per second from the film. So when we're talking a few frames, it's an insignificant period of time because
Robert, this is a side shot.
That's exactly right. That's right, because 0.7 of a second later is the fifth shot that takes place in this case. And it hits Kennedy in the top of his cowlick. And we were able to, Bob Groden and I, Bob Groden was a representative expert in all of this who worked with me on this issue when we determined that there must have been a fifth shot because of all of the damage that the fragments had done. But where'd they come from? But I'll get to that in a moment, because what happened with the fourth shot that was in the stockade fence area in close proximity to where Zapruder was filming, this shot, and this is what destroys in part the entire government pretense of an investigation. The fourth shot caused Kennedy's head to violently move backwards and to his left, just as I'm doing here for you now. His head he was shot here above the right temple, and he above the right temple, above his right ear. His head snaps back as if he were hit with a baseball bat, as some of the witnesses said who were watching this whole thing. And it falls on his wife's right shoulder, where he becomes bodily depressed. He's immobile, and he basically is slumped dead, resting on Mrs. Kennedy's right shoulder. But why do I mention this to you? Is so important. We know this as human beings who know the very basics of science. If someone is shot in the back of the head, which the government says Kennedy was, how does his head go backwards?
No, it doesn't. It goes forward.
Thank you. Right. Now the government was confronted with dilemma. They knowingly went out of its way to say that Kennedy was shot 3 times, all from the back. But now the evidence shows us on film that his head snapped back. So what the government did to try to cover that up was to make 10 gelatinized skulls. And they were going to do a shooting practice. Same height as the depository window, 6th floor, same distance, same rifle. And they then shot these 10 skulls. And guess which direction they went? Take a wild guess.
Well, I had to go forward.
Exactly. Thank you very much. You win the prize. You get the Koopy doll here. That's it. I'm a witness for you.
Right. Thank you.
So how can they justify all this? And that's how they come up with neutron activation analysis. And then that gets destroyed because these metallurgical PhDs went out of their way to give scathing critiques. And so what happened was the FBI now was under the gun because they had sent agents into court under oath testifying that you could match a fragment to a fragment or a fragment to a bullet. And now the FBI said, please, to the experts, give us the 10 best experts you know in the country who are metallurgical experts, and we want to know what their opinion is. And they did that, and every one of them, their opinion was, you shoot somebody in the back of the head's going to go forward. This is so basic.
Yeah, I mean, Roger Stone even presented it in his movie, as you know.
Well, I'm not something. I'd like to tell you about something about Stone, in my opinion.
Okay.
We don't share the same view of America. I thank God I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Okay, I don't have to. You know what I'm coming from with that.
Yeah, I know.
And I don't perceive him, and I've had this argument with him about how we differ about what America is and so on. I'm a very much, as far as my value system goes, is somewhere, between Lincoln, Jefferson, and Washington. So, but that doesn't mean I don't listen to other people. I don't respect their right to have a different opinion. I'm just telling you myself. Right. And in that movie, the reason I mentioned Stone was he puts in that movie a load of important evidence. It's very difficult for someone to watch that film for the first time and process it all.
Right.
So to his credit, I told him this when we met on occasion. what you've done here is a good service. No question about it. And that's my opinion. And he was very gracious about it all, always. We were very professional. This wasn't any petty ante stuff. So we now know that neutron activation analysis was invalid. And the one bullet theory is an embarrassment, because how do you get a bullet that has a downward track to come up 11 degrees and come out the throat in order to justify what the one bullet theory is all about?
Right.
So,
Robert, let me ask you, what about, was there any validity to that bullet that was found in the stretcher?
No, because the bullet that was found in the stretcher, they claimed to be the pristine bullet. That's the other aspect of all this. In the evidence in the book, I was able to show where the government took that bullet as an example and did test firing with the bullet and with other similar bullets. And that is to say, they took 2 shots with bullets into cotton wadding. Well, there was no deformity, nor did anybody expect it.
Right.
But that's 2 bullets. So the fourth bullet was shot and struck Kennedy in the rib. And that bullet had some deformity. The 5th bullet struck the skeleton in the right wrist. This is the axial nerve in the right wrist where Kennedy was, where Connolly was shot.
Right.
And that's where they took that fragment from. And that's where Connolly was struck, according to the government in the single bullet theory, from the bullet going up with 11 degrees out the throat. It struck Connolly in the back, in the right shoulder, and in his back, in his rib, and struck him at the axial nerve. Now,
Right.
why do I mention this again to you? Because when you look at the testing that the government did on this bullet, it was totally deformed, but not the pristine bullet that allegedly did all this. You with me? And I'm saying, I know it gets confusing after a while, but the bottom line here is that the pristine bullet that they used in this 5-bullet example, the first 2 in cotton wadding, no deformity. The 4th bullet, if I'm talking, 1 is the pristine, 2, 3 cotton wadding. The 4th bullet strikes the rib, and then the 5th bullet, which did most of the damage here, struck and in the axial nerve in Connolly's wrist, fractured his wrist. And by the way, how do we know all this as well? Connolly, as you recall, was holding that Stetson hat, the white hat.
Right. Exactly.
Upside down, so they could just flip it on. Throughout all the shooting, he holds on to that, except when he gets that shot in the axial nerve. And it would be the equivalent, the doctors have told me, the experts, is if we were shot right below the knee. If that were the case, we would fall down. We wouldn't be able to stand up. Right. Similarly, when you're shot in the axial nerve and it fractures your wrist and severs the tendon in your right hand from right thumb to index finger, he must have that's what he experienced, and that's why he drops the white Stetson hat. So there are so many different ways to tell the truth here, but yet our government contrived its conclusion. It was predetermined, and it was a pretense, and none of this evidence was offered. By the way, the Parkland doctors offered were potential major truth tellers in this case. I mean, here they are in trauma room 1 when the body is brought in, and they're trying to do everything they can, experimentally or otherwise, all within science that they were familiar with. They could not save his life, and they tried to do everything they could to do it.
And it's amazing how heroic that was, Robert, because his brain, half of his brain was out of his skull. That's
exactly right. And what you perfect point. I wanted to mention that to you, and that is that Dr. Kem Clark, who was chief of neurosurgery, was in trauma room 1 with his staff, and he said he observed the gaping hole in the back of JFK's head, and it was the lower right occipital bone, which is the parietal bone and the occipital bone, meet together in the back of our head. Right. That was blown out, and he said he saw the cerebellum. And Clint Hill was a Secret Service agent. When he went and hit the car at the back of it, he looked down. He said he saw JFK had an empty head.
Right.
And he wrote about that in his own book.
Well, and also that Jacqueline Kennedy, when you saw her, jumping to the back of the truck, was in Clint. I interviewed Clint, and he said that she was just grabbing the president's brain matter and bringing it back in. It's just
exactly right. So then we have Dr. Robert McClellan. This is interesting. He drafted a vivid diagram, and an expert came in, and it depicted the gaping hole in the back of JFK's head, which has been legendary. You see it, it's about this large, this gaping hole in the back of the president's head. And then an interesting phenomenon was that Dr. Robert Shaw was the thoracic surgeon that helped out, that went right to the aid of Governor Connolly in the trauma room. And he did something and said something few people mentioned, but I want you to hear it. And that is that Dr. Robert Shaw, who was Connolly's thoracic surgeon, said that it was a downward track. And keep in mind, this was before he spoke to anybody, and that is to say, other than the injured. And he said it downward track, and he's talking into his microphone, as the doctors do at autopsy and so on, the purpose of which they want to make sure that anyone else who comes in can pick it up right away. Right. And they don't own this, they know that. It's all scientific, and they share information. And Shaw said that the shot in that hit Connolly had a 27-degree declination, downward track.
Exactly, right. Let me ask you this, Robert, real quick. Sidebar real quick. I'm sorry, but did they ever determine that the rifle that Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly used, was there any evidence of that a round had been shot from that gun?
No, and I want to tell you something about that. Let me just finish this point.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry.
I'm going to go right to that. The rifle issue, the problem they really had, and it deals exactly with your question. So thank you. I'm going to get right to it, though. And that is, Dr. Robert Shaw said that there was a 27-degree declination, and it was a downward track, in and out bullet that hit Connolly in the back. Remember the first shots, the first flurry?
Right.
Here's something few people have ever mentioned. Guess what the downward track is from the rooftop of the county records building in the northeast corner of Houston Street and Elm, and that was directly to the rear of the presidential limo. That the downward track from the rooftop of the county records building to the point of hitting Connolly and Kennedy in the back was 27 degrees. Now, keep in mind, you know this, that the downward track from the county records building on high has a direct view of Elm Street and that limo moving down westerly. So when people say, what is the evidence of another shooter? That is evidence of another shooter. And here's why. A problem occurred in the case. And part of the problem that occurred in the case was that the following had happened. In December of '63, the Secret Service and the FBI found that Connolly and Kennedy were struck by two separate bullets. Both were shot within 1.9 seconds of each other. Well, why is that important? This wipes out the Mannlicher-Carcano rifle as the murder weapon. Why? Yes. Because the Mannlicher-Carcano takes 2.3 seconds in order to engage in the bolt action.
Right, exactly.
Let me repeat that for a moment. Kennedy and Connolly were struck with separate bullets at a differential of 1.9 seconds. In order for that rifle to fire, it takes 2.3 seconds. So the best that it could say in this case was it got off the first shot. It could not have got off the second shot. Therefore, it is no longer the major murder weapon in this case.
Exactly. But yet, they showed us demonstration. I think it was ABC did this whole demonstration about this $19 rifle and how they were able to release those rounds, accordingly. So it was irrefutable. But here, you're proving, you're saying it was impossible.
Exactly. It's impossible because you can't get off the second shot from the rifle in less than 2.3 seconds.
Right.
Well, then who else shot? There had to be another shooter, to the extent that we know there's more than one shot, and that it took the manual bolt action says you can't fire this rifle, the Manico rifle, in less than 2.3 seconds. But
Right.
they were hit between 1.9 seconds. All of which, you see, when they lied, they didn't know any of this would ever happen.
Right.
They didn't know the Zapruder film would show us exactly what was going on here. Frame 313, we see the president's head snap back. Heads do not snap back when they're shot from the back. Heads move forward when they're hit. By the way, an interesting thing, I think, for your audience to appreciate what you're doing here, and you're making a major service as far as I'm concerned, is that scientifically, from the facts here, not opinion, we're demonstrating that the government's case is totally unbelievable and contrary to what they allege. They allege they had science. The metallurgical PhDs said there is no science in this case. The neutron activation analysis is a fake. It's invalid.
Right.
And it's a fabrication. And
Right.
as a matter of fact, what we have in the case, which I haven't mentioned yet, is what we call the minute metallic fragments. I'll be very quick on this. If someone were to shoot me in the back of the head right now, there would be no minute metallic fragments in the front of my skull. So keep in mind that the minute metallic fragments inside JFK's head were at the side of his head, and the scientifically, the minute metallic fragments tell us the direction of the wound, and you can see the 3 skull X-rays. It's available in the archives.
Right.
And it shows how this wound goes from above his right ear, the temple area, all the way to the back of his skull. But what it also tells us is the point of entry.
I was going to say, exactly. That was my question.
That's it. The point of entry. Once we know the point of entry came from the front center, the geographically front of the limo. The limo's moving this way. The shots were here and hit Kennedy in the side of the head and blew his head back. That's why one thing is watch the head, not the body of JFK, because it's not the body moving JFK's head. It's the head moving the body.
Right.
And that's why we know all of these facts that are irrefutable. This is just my opinion on any of this.
Well, and the thing is, lest we forget, JFK was in a brace.
Exactly. Oh,
right.
You're absolutely right. Now, that gets into the detail that is so magnificent from an evidentiary point of view. All of this is. I mean, keep in mind, this is our government telling us neutron activation analysis. We now have the science they were going around saying, and they were saying, you congressman, you senator, if you disagree with us, you believe the earth is flat. They said these things. This is not made up.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that, guess what? The only people who believe that the earth is flat are people who believe in the one bullet theory. Right. And that's the bottom line here. It's a big twist around. No one expected that to happen from our government, but lo and behold, that's what happened.
Yeah, so, you imagine here, Robert, how many millions of dollars did the government spend of taxpayer money to come up with this big lie?
Well, not only is it the money, as you well know, but I know from you, given the kind of person you are, it shatters the credibility of our government.
Exactly.
And there's no reason for this to have happened except that the CIA was running the show, pure and simple.
And complicit with the FBI.
Exactly. So there was another piece of evidence that I was able to uncover, which I think we should mention here, and that was this John McCone issue. John McCone was a lawyer, and JFK was so livid about what happened at the Bay of Pigs in the Cuban fiasco in 61 that he fired Allen Dulles.
Right.
And he put in John McCone. And McCone, again, I mentioned this is important for what he did. John McCone was a major Kennedy supporter, and he received an inquiry from James Rowley, who was then chief of the Secret Service. And Rowley said to him, we're concerned here that there have been leaks from our committees, that is the Secret Service, and from the CIA, because McCone now is head of the CIA from 61.
Right.
And he wanted to know what McCone's feeling was, Mr. Rowley, who was chief of the Secret Service. And McCone wrote back to him and said the following in substance: He said the leaks about Lee Harvey Oswald are very, very important because it gets involved with his training and his suspect activity. They were concerned at that point more with hiding the fact that Oswald was an agent of the CIA and the FBI since 1957, when he was at Atsugi Air Force Base in Japan, monitoring the U-2 flights. And one of those flights got shot down, as you may recall. And the government figured there must be a mole, because no one can know how to bring these planes down and or lift them up except experts.
Right.
And so they decided that they would try and make sure that people did not know. That's the American people we're talking about here. That the American people would not know that Lee Harvey Oswald was a contract employee for the CIA and the FBI. So what he says is, I'm concerned if this information in any way is disclosed to the wrong persons, meaning the media,
right,
that they will claim that this agency, the CIA, and perhaps others were directly involved in the assassination. Amazing comment. It's a 2-page letter. At the top of page 2, which is paragraph 6, while the persons involved, he goes on to say, were in the employ of the CIA, the persons involved in the assassination were involved. And by the way, they refer to the assassination as the Dallas action. So let me put that together again for you. McCone says, in response to Rowley's concern about people finding out that Oswald was really a person who was working for our government, and he said, I'm concerned that if this information in any way is disclosed to the wrong persons, it would lead the media to erroneously claim that the CIA and perhaps others were directly involved in the Dallas action, the assassination of the president. And the next sentence is, you got to sit down for this one.
Okay.
Well, the persons involved in the assassination were in the employ of this agency. We're talking about the President of the United States here.
Right.
An admission. Later on, when this happened, oh my God, please tell the public that this was a lie.
Yeah.
And I had this checked out from alpha to omega, from experts in the field. Who found it? Others who used it. And it was all, the document was there where it was supposed to be. There was no fake here. Yeah. The fake here is the government trying to spin itself out yet again.
Exactly. And look at how far the government's come, Robert. I mean, here, at least in paper, they're saying they're concerned the media could chase this down. Now, fast forward to the Trump attempted assassination. And it's interesting, the pattern and how you may have people who were government operatives involved, and how this kind of ends up, disappearing conveniently. I don't know. It just, there's some similarities here for me in my mind as I follow this. And of course, now today, whether it's January 6th or other events that have happened in our country where, the exposure of government operatives, FBI and CIA operatives are operating domestically within our country, doing a lot of bad stuff.
That is why I was able to get a hold of, you're leading me right into this point of President Truman. President Truman had a major revelation that he felt responsible for the CIA, that the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, which was our intel organization in World War II, he was distressed that he permitted OSS, Office of Strategic Services, to morph into the CIA. And why was he concerned about that? And he wrote a very damning memo on this thing on December 22, 63, 12/22/63. And in it, it's a very important critique of the CIA. And what he's saying was, it's become operational and it forms policy. And the people involved in oversight are not doing their job. They're afraid of retaliation. I'll give you an example. Mr. Schumer, this great senator from Brooklyn, not when I was there, that's all I can tell you. He went after Trump in Trump's first term. When you recall, I'm sure Trump was dealing with the executive intelligence agencies that they're gone far afield here. So what did Schumer say? And by the way, he was in charge of oversight in the United States Senate at the time, because that was the majority party at the time, the Democrats.
Right.
Schumer says, as the major overseer, we thought that Trump was so smart. This was during his first term. He's now taking on the executive intelligence agencies. Doesn't he know there's 10, 7, 10, 8, 9, 10 ways till Sunday that they'll come back at you and get you?
Yes. That was crazily telling. You're exactly right. I remember when he said that, and I'm going, whoa, that's quite, because every once in a while, because even crazy Jerry Nadler, right? He goes, there's no such thing as the deep state.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So all of the things that we're talking about here render what they've done, in a very sad fashion. I'll give you another example of this.
We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to let you kind of do a summation here, Robert. Okay, we're going to put you a little bit in the, before our viewers here. Go ahead.
Well, as part of any summation here, you're the first person I have to commend for giving me the opportunity and others to tell what the facts are. That's all. And we talk about the truth. It's not an opinion. The facts here are overwhelming. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. I always kept Congressman Lou Stokes every night. I told him where we were. So everything I'm telling you, I told him. This is not something that Sprague and I kept to ourselves. We weren't here, again, trying to make history, if you will. To the contrary, we were appalled with the facts that were there. So why didn't others do this? So I said to Lou Stokes, very good man, and we became lifelong friends. And I said, Lou, I need a subpoena, 2 subpoenas. One, I have information that the CIA, in fact, has memos talking about its participation in this assassination, and the other memo, the other subpoena I need is that I'm trying to determine whether this was an action taken by the CIA or it was a rogue action by some 1 or 2 or more people decided to take this into their own hands. He said, Bob, the committee's not going to help you. I said, why'd you hire us? I told you not to hire me. And Dick, if it comes down to any issue, we're not going to compromise on search for truth here. And you can't run the Congress, Article 1 in any way without compromise. You can't have everybody as a chief executive here and then Article 2. So he said, Bob, the committee never thought you would find out, much less how quickly you did, about this sordid mess we have. I said, Lou, you know everything I know because I've told you this. Why? What am I missing? He said, they're afraid of retaliation.
There it is.
So here I am again. I went through this, we went through this with neutron activation analysis. We went through this with a single bullet theory. And here he is at the end of this mess telling me that people are afraid that they can be somehow unfriendly. Let's put it in a very, quiet light, a dim light, that somehow or other the CIA can harm them in some fashion, is what he was telling me.
Robert, hundreds of people have died who have investigated the JFK assassination. Donald Trump, you and I talked about this last time. He was getting ready to release everything, right? And all of a sudden he stops. Why does he stop?
He said the reason he stopped, he said to good people that if you saw what I saw in these records, he said, you would not have released them either. But that's exactly what we need to see.
Exactly.
I'm so tired of listening to people who don't trust the American public. That you represent the American public.
Yeah.
How can you be representing the very people you're saying to the American public, we don't trust you? It's just too heavy-handed. Well, it's nonsense. And Stokes, as I said, was a good man. And as a matter of fact, I wanted to mention that we started off with this in essence, was the Stone movie. It created the JFK Records Act of 1992. Mm-hmm. I think the movie was in '91 and right in that area, and it created the Assassination Record Review Board of '93. I was asked by the district court judge from Minneapolis, very fine young man, and a federal judge, and he asked me if I, after talking to him, would appear before the committee and give my testimony. I said, absolutely. The reason I mention this is I in '93, and this is on the record, you can get this transcript.
Right.
I said in '93 that every document should be given over.
Exactly.
There was no absolute reason for anyone to suggest that the American public can't handle all of this information. They're the best people to handle all this information.
Right.
What we're all about. So in summation, I would say we need desperately to cut this nonsense out about who can we trust with information.
Right.
When it's the government's responsibility in cases like this to tell the truth. Exactly. And that's what we went to Washington to do. We found out they wouldn't let us do it, and Sprague and I left in like March of '77, and we never regretted that, because I never dreamed that they would wind up doing what they did, and that was they made major lies to the American public.
Well, Robert Tanenbaum, you're a true patriot, and I appreciate all the great work. Thank you so much for coming on and bringing the evidence, to our audience. They can continue to do their research. The book That Day in Dallas, Lee Harvey Oswald Did Not Kill JFK, and read and do your own research. This, after all, is a government of, for, by, we the people, which means that in order to have the consent of the governed must be educated. They must be intellectualized. This is why our First Amendment is so key. Robert, again, thank you so much. Godspeed, my friend. I appreciate you.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
You got it. Robert Tanenbaum, his book, That Day in Dallas, Lee Harvey Oswald Did Not Kill JFK, is best described as prosecution by Mr. Tanenbaum of those corrupt, unscrupulous government and unelected agency officials who from inception, with predetermined outcomes, deceitfully engaged in insecure, phony pretense probes regarding the assassination in Dealey Plaza. Those responsible should be prosecuted, while those who speak truth to power should be exonerated. In 1976, as Robert pointed out and explained, he was appointed deputy chief counsel in charge of the congressional investigation into the assassination of President JFK. And it would appear that he is not finished with his job yet, because the truth fully has not gotten out. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sharing a part of your day. And hopefully this motivates you to do further research and find out for yourself. As we say, own your own knowledge. I thank you for being with us. May God bless you, may keep you, may make his face shine upon you and give you peace. God bless.